Members will be in their seats. The clerk has opened the roll, and you may record your presence. Please rise and give attention to our guest chaplain, Dr. David Manor, State Executive Director of Kansas-Nebraska Convention of Southern Baptists. Guests of Representative Butler, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Representative Schmoy.
Let's pray together. Lord, I pray for these members of the Kansas House of Representatives that you will encourage and enrich them today. Guide them in the unique ways their hearts and minds are willing to hear, and surround them with others to hold them accountable. Lord, in a nation that is often divided, give them the resolve to reach across the aisle when possible, and to strive for unity even in their diversity without compromising their convictions. And help these representatives model for the rest of our nation how is it indeed possible to work together for the good of all. And Lord, help these trusted leaders to honor you and their families and their constituents by acting justly even when other colleagues might not, and by loving mercy not as a sign of weakness, but instead divine strength, and by walking in the humility of waking up every morning feeling unqualified to do alone what you've called them to do. Finally, Lord, may these leaders hear your voice above the multitude of other voices screaming for them or at them, and give them divine wisdom to get it right and grace when they don't. These things we pray in your name. Amen.
Amen. Has every member had an opportunity to record their presence? The clerk will close the roll and record the attendance. The speaker recognizes Representative Dodson and Carlin on a point of personal privilege.
Get mass behind me. Small chance of that. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's good to be here with the body this morning. I'm joined by my fellow legislator from Manhattan, and we're proud to be here with the Kansas State University ball team.
Mr. Representative, I'd like to invite all the K-State alum to come down and join us.
I was going to have them raise their hands.
No, they need to come down. They want to be here. I'm so excited.
I'm afraid we're not going to have anybody left.
That was my point, Mr. Mr. Representative.
These Democrats.
Well, this just gives you some idea of the kinds of support that this great team and our great university gets all over the state. So we really appreciate that. And let me ask my fellow representative to introduce the team and the coach.
Oh, thank you, Representative Dodson. I'd like to introduce first our wonderful new coach, Chris Kleiman. And our Director of Football Recruiting didn't come? Okay, Taylor Brett, but he didn't come, but he's an important person on the team. And the players here today are Will Howard, our quarterback, Austin Moore, Daniel Green, Eli Huggins, and holding the trophy, Hayden Gillum. Look at that trophy. We're so proud of our Wildcats, and thank you for enjoying this today with us.
Well, just a few words, I think, today, but we're here to recognize this great football team, the great university. As all of you know, and the trophy on the left-hand side behind me is the Big 12 trophy, and we're glad to have that with us. This is a great event for the whole state. And also like to recognize their selection for the Sugar Bowl. That's a big deal for the state of Kansas, really puts us on the map. So how do we get here with such a great team? Well, this achievement was the result of great coaches, dedicated players, committed to hard work, execution, teamwork. And in the tradition of Kansas State University, these coaches and players formed a true family where they cared about each other not only on the playing field, but also off the field in their daily endeavors. Now, these players come from across the United States, and they come into the team at all times of the year. This makes forming a team really a big challenge these days. But the way this was done by our coaches and by the team coming together is truly remarkable. So the coaches led them through great training, made their academics keep pace. All of these young players are great academicians as well. And that's something that we've got to make sure we continue. And they've also provided emotional strength. And all of us remember when we were going through college, you've got ups and downs through your days. And that's what the coaching staff and the other great supporters do for them. So this is how a great team is built. This is what it takes to achieve victory. And victory over some very, very highly qualified and talented teams. So this team has represented the values of Kansas State University and Kansas and their athletic department, and they've gained the respect of other teams across the nation as they've made their way through the Big 12 and the Sugar Bowl. So that's a source of great pride. The people of Kansas are very proud of your achievements and also of your sportsmanship on the field. The state of Kansas is proud to be represented by our Wildcats. You've added to the legacy of our great teams of Kansas. The entire membership of the Kansas House extends its pride in your significant achievements. So go Cats.
Oh, okay.
And Mr. Speaker, I ask that our words be spread across the journal.
Without objection, so ordered.
I want to add one thing. We're not finished yet. Sweet 16 is coming. Kansas is going to be represented by Kansas women, Kansas State women, and Kansas State Wildcat men's team. And the Sweet 16, congratulations to all of you and for all of your good sportsmanship and your good work. Thank you.
Speaker recognizes Representative Hoy on a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning. It is an honor to present a special recognition to some exemplary Kansas journalists who strive to report objectively and fairly while sharing their talents on behalf of their schools. Each year, the National Scholastic Press Association, NSPA, awards the Pacemaker to the best student publications in the nation. It is the most prestigious and award in scholastic journalism and is often referred to as the Pulitzer Prize for high school journalism. Recently, NSPA celebrated its 100th anniversary and chose to recognize the most awarded publications since the organization was founded. The Pacemaker 100 represents a one-time snapshot of the 100 publications recognized in this competition over the last 100 years. 6 student publications from the Shawnee Mission School District were recognized in the Pacemaker 100. 3 of these publications placed in the top 10 for their yearbooks. NSPA Executive Director Laura Widmer said she believes that the Shawnee Mission District is the powerhouse of scholastic journalism, as quoted in the Shawnee Mission Post. Shawnee Mission is the only district in the country to have 3 schools in the top 10. They are the best of the best. And this is exciting. So let's get right to it. From the top 10 of the Pacemaker 100 with a number 9 spot, we have Shawnee Mission East Yearbook, the Hauberg, advisor Dow Tate, and student editors Catherine Heitman, Catherine Gould, and Lyda Cosgrove are here representing East Journalism. Number 4, Shawnee Mission North Yearbook, the Brick House, is represented by advisor Becky Tate and former student and current Shawnee Mission South Journalism advisor Tucker Love. And coming in at number 1 is the Shawnee Mission Northwest Yearbook, The Lair. Advisor Susan Massey and student editors Katie Burke and Grace Logan are here with us today. And I would like to make a special mention that Susan is retiring this year after 44 years of teaching, 42 of those at Shawnee Mission Northwest. Thank you, Susan, for your dedication to our students. You had a hand in this award-winning reputation, and we are proud of this legacy and wish you the best in your retirement. I'd also like to welcome Dr. Ryan Fleury, Principal of Career Education Campuses, and seated in the gallery are Shawnee Mission Northwest Principal Lisa Gruman, Shawnee Mission North Principal David Ewers, Shawnee Mission East Principal Jason Pearies, and approximately 30 student journalists from Shawnee Mission Northwest. Shawnee Mission East and Shawnee Mission Northwest newspapers and other Kansas-led publications are among those in the Pacemaker 100, so I encourage you to check out that esteemed list. These accomplishments deserve our sincere commendations. Please join me in congratulating these students and educators on their hard work and tremendous achievements. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah. I ask that my remarks be spread across the journal.
Without objection, so ordered. Speaker recognizes Representative Lewis and Underhill on a point of personal privilege. And Representative Schreiber.
Ready? Good morning, body. Today we are recognizing Taran Humphrey, a decorated Olympic athlete, Turin was a member of the 2004 Olympic silver medalist gymnastics team, a member of the 2003 World Championship team, and is an inductee of the Gymnastics Hall of Fame. Additionally, Turin is a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. In 2020, she came forward revealing she had been sexually assaulted by Dr. Larry Nasser, the national gymnastics team doctor. During his long tenure as team doctor, Dr. Nasser preyed on hundreds of other young gymnasts and is now serving a long prison sentence. In bravely sharing her story, Turin, along with other survivors of childhood sexual abuse, several of whom are also in front of you today, have brought the topic of childhood sexual abuse to public attention, helping people better understand the scope and seriousness of this issue. Child sex abuse ruins lives and often leads to suicide.
When explaining the problem, Taryn challenges people to imagine the most terrible, embarrassing thing that has ever happened to you. Would you want to share it? Now imagine being a child and being expected to come forward when you don't even yet have the capacity to understand what happened and may lack finances and support base to navigate the confusing justice system. Taryn is joined today on the House floor by other courageous survivors who have spoken out and found their voice. We honor them as well. They are Kim Bergman, Lisa Patterson-Kinsey, Joe Charay, and Tess Ramirez. Child sex abuse robs the victims of their childhood, of their agency, and their very humanity. We must do a better job of protecting our children from sexual predators. So please join me in honoring this Olympic athlete and her courage in speaking out against child sexual abuse. And Mr. Chair, I ask that our words be spread across the journal.
Without objection, so ordered. Speaker recognizes Representative Titus on a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the House. Today, I would like to recognize the achievements of the student athletes and coaches at Wamego High School. This past fall, Wamego won state championships in girls golf and boys cross country and finishes the runner-up in football. With me today are the state champion golf and cross country teams. First, I'd like to recognize the Wamego girls golf team who won their second straight Class 4A title by 88 strokes and set the new state record for margin of victory in Class 4A and just 1 stroke shy of the state record of 89 strokes. With me today are the following state champions: Kirby McKee, Ashton Pearson, Trista Hubler, Sarah Springer, Addison Douglas, Kiana Meyer, and Coach Christy Miller in the gallery. Also with me today is the Wamego boys cross country team, which earned the school's 9th cross country state championship this past fall. Wamego defeated the 4-time defending champion Buhler by 8 points. I'd also like to recognize head coach Rick Patton, who is with us in the gallery, who is recognized for the 7th time as coach of the year and has led Wamego to the state races 35 times. With me today are the following champions: Brady Stegman, Harrison Cutting, Emery Wolf, Peyton Parker, Allie Coopy, Johnny Cutting, and Joey Shea. Please join me in recognizing the outstanding student athletes and coaches of Wamego High School. Mr. Speaker, I ask that my remarks be spread across the journal.
Without objection, so ordered. Final action on bills and concurrent resolutions. The clerk will read.
House Bill number 2313 by Representative Sanders, Awer-Camp, and others. An act concerning health and healthcare, creating the Born Alive Infants Protection Act, providing legal protections for infants born alive, requiring certain standards of care by healthcare providers for infants who are born alive, providing criminal penalties and civil liability for violation of the act.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2313. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote. Has every member had an opportunity to record their vote? The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Oh, I didn't vote. Thought I pushed my button too early and it didn't register. Representative Vaughn on an explanation of vote.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I vote no on House Bill 2313. First, I want to note that this is already required by federal law to provide care to babies that are born alive. The Born Alive Act of 2002 required that this care be given to babies born alive at any stage of development for any reason. What this bill does is place significant liabilities on abortion providers and hospitals and creates gray area where none existed before. Proponents say this bill allows mothers to hold their babies as they die. That is not how the bill reads. It says babies must be transported immediately, not as soon as practicable, not with the mother's consent, immediately. This bill takes away the right of a mother to make her own private medical decisions in the most complicated and heartbreaking of cases. This is a right the overwhelming majority of Kansans voted to protect in the August 2nd election. Therefore, I vote no. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Are there further explanation of votes? Representative Featherston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I did not come to my no vote on HB 2013 lightly. However, after extensive consultation with friends who have dedicated their professional lives to saving babies in high-risk pregnancies, I realized that several scenarios presented yesterday are not tightly tied to today's truth. To suggest that medical professionals are failing to aid newly delivered babies is another insult to a profession that has been under attack throughout the pandemic for simply trying to save lives. I also have serious concerns that physicians delivering any baby early by non-natural means could be charged under this bill.
Further explanations of vote. Representative Eric Smith.
I'd vote yes on HB 2313 because I believe that we don't make decisions on whose life we save depending on who pays the bill or how close we are to a hospital. I vote yes.
Further explanation of vote. Representative Jacobs.
Mr. Speaker, I vote yes on House Bill 2313. Thomas Jefferson said, "The care of human life and happiness, not their destruction, is the first and only object of good government." I simply hate the fact that in the state of Kansas, we would allow the barbaric murder and dismemberment of an innocent child in the mother's womb. It saddens my heart and burdens my spirit that we allow a baby to be extracted from its mother's womb and die from a botched, brutal abortion. I pray for the day where we would stop killing our own children and ask God for forgiveness and mercy. Representatives Jacobs, Garber, Ellis, Donahue, Fairchild, Hill, Riley.
Further explanation of vote. Does anyone desire to change his or her vote? Representative Epley votes aye. Representative Titus votes aye. Representative Hoffman votes aye. Oh, sorry. Representative Wynn votes no. Representative Garber votes aye. Representative Robinson votes aye. Representative Martinez votes aye. The Speaker votes aye. Any further changes of vote? Seeing none. 88 voting in favor and 34 against the passage of House Bill 2313, the same having received a constitutional majority. The bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action on bills and concurrent resolutions. The clerk will read.
House Concurrent Resolution Number 5008 by the Committee on Federal State Affairs. A concurrent resolution applying to the Congress of the United States to call a convention of the states for the purpose of proposing amendments to the Constitution of the United States that impose limits on the federal government.
This constitutes final action on HCR 5008. The clerk will open the roll and you will record your vote. Has every member had an opportunity to record their vote? The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Representative Poskin.
Mr. Speaker, we vote no on House Concurrent Resolution 5008. It's the second call for a convention of states this session. While we can change the stated purpose, whether to set federal term limits or to impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, we can't change the fact that there is no guarantee that we limit the scope and keep a convention of states from going off the rails. We are not willing to endanger our Constitution in this way. Representatives Collins and Poskin.
Further explanation of vote. Representative Johnson.
Under the theory of interposition, a state assumes the right to interpose itself between the federal government and the people of the state by taking action to prevent the federal government from enforcing laws that the state considers unconstitutional. Without the interposition of individual states to convene a convention of states to resolve the degradation of constitutional law, our nation will continue to become a bureaucratically controlled government that erodes the freedoms of the individual. I vote yes to support the Convention of States. Representative Johnson.
Further explanation of votes. Seeing none, does anybody desire to change his or her vote? Representative Beeler votes aye. Any further changes of votes? Seeing none, 74 having voted in favor and 48 against the passage of HCR 5008, the same having not received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared lost. The clerk will record the vote. Speaker recognizes the Majority Leader Croft for a motion to resolve into the Committee of the Whole.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House resolve itself in the Committee of the Whole for the purpose of considering those items under the heading of General Orders.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the motion carries. Speaker appoints Representative Adam Smith to chair the Committee of the Whole.
Good morning, everyone. The first item of business up for the body is Senate Bill 113, and for the purpose of carrying Senate Bill 113, the chair recognizes Representative Christy Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were committee amendments. I move the adoption of the committee report.
You've heard the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion passes and the committee report is adopted. Please continue.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, body. House substitute for Senate Bill 113 contains our constitutionally funded commitment to K-12 education. It includes policy provisions such as updates to the out-of-district enrollment law passed last year, removal of prohibition to pay local school board members, the allowance of non-public school students in Kansas to participate in KSHA activities in their resident districts, renewal of the 20 mil tax levy, and the allowance of current year enrollment counts for calculating state aid. In addition, this bill codifies in statute the impactful and successful mental health intervention program that has benefited hundreds of Kansas students, actually thousands of Kansas students in over 200 different schools and over 50 different school districts. This bill maintains our commitment to public education and includes a $600 million state general fund increase from fiscal year 2022 to fiscal year 2024. Mr. Chair, I'll now stand for questions.
Does any member desire to speak to the bill? The chair recognizes Representative Poskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your patience. So good morning, colleagues. Did you miss me yesterday? You know, I wasn't here. It's the first time I've been absent during a floor debate. And, you know, I know somebody did. 1 out of 125 of us, you might not notice missing. That's okay. But where I was is very important to what's missing in this bill. I was at Shawnee Mission South High School in my district, House District 20, hearing from special needs students, their parents, and their teachers. I heard how a gifted IEP helped Alex get into a highly competitive advanced math camp in Maine. How IEP services for 18 to 21-year-olds are preparing them for independent living. I heard about the joy of participating as a special needs student on varsity unified bowling and going to the state championship. One peer tutor announced yesterday that she's going to go to K-State next year to become a special education teacher. So Senate Bill 113, our K-12 budget bill, is missing something. It's missing special education funding. Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment.
The amendment appears short. The clerk will read.
Line, on page 4, following line 23 by inserting special education services aid, $592,740,238, provided that any unencumbered balance in the special education services aid account in excess of $100 as of June 30, 2023 is hereby reappropriated for fiscal year 2024. Provided further that expenditure shall not be made from the Special Education Services Aid account for the provision of instruction for any homebound or hospitalized child unless the categorization of such child as exceptional is conjoined with the categorization of the child within one or more of the other categories of exceptionality, and provided further that expenditure shall be made from this account for grants to school districts in amounts determined pursuant to the provisions of KSA 723425, provided further that expenditure shall be made from the amount remaining in this account after deduction of the expenditures specified in the foregoing provisos for payments to school districts in amounts determined pursuant to the provisions of KSA 723422.
Representative Poskin, you may further explain if you wish.
Thank you. It basically provides for 2024 special education funding as already approved by the K-12 Budget Committee. I'll stand for questions.
For questions or to speak on the amendment, the chair recognizes Representative Landwehr.
Would the carrier amendment stand for a question, please?
Absolutely.
All right. So what other budget are you cutting $600 million from?
I'm not.
All right, thank you. Mr. Speaker, at this time, I would like to point out that I believe that this does violate the pay-go rule, so I would challenge it at this time.
PAYGO has been challenged. The chair would look to the rules chair for a ruling on the germaneness or the challenge of PAYGO. The chair recognizes Representative Patton for a ruling.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This clearly is a bill making and concerning appropriations. It appropriates money to the Department of Education in our schools. House Rule 2110 deals with floor amendments making appropriations, and it says no floor amendment to increase the amount of expenditures shall be authorized unless there is an amendment that contains a provision reducing a like or greater amount. Therefore, this amendment violates House Rule 2110 and is not in order. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Poskin, you have the floor.
Okay. I was expecting that, so I do have another amendment.
The amendment appears short. The clerk will read.
Page 4, following line 23 by inserting special education services aid, $592,740,238, provided that any unencumbered balance in the Special Education Services Aid account in excess of $100 as of June 30, 2023 is hereby reappropriated for fiscal year 2024. Provided further that expenditure shall not be made from the Special Education Services Aid account for the provision of instruction for any homebound or hospitalized child unless the categorization of such child is exceptional as conjoined with the categorization of the child within one or more other categories of exceptionality. Provided further that expenditure shall be made from this account for grants to school districts in amounts determined pursuant to the provisions of KSA 3425, and provided further that expenditure shall be made from the amount remaining in this account after deduction of the expenditure specified in the foregoing provisos for payment to school districts in amounts determined pursuant to the provisions of KSA 723422 on page 10 by striking all in lines 28 through 43.
Representative Poskin, you may explain your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in order to not violate the pay-go rule, it basically moves the fiscal year 25 special education funding in the bill to fiscal year 2024. Questions?
Does any member wish to speak to the amendment? The chair recognizes Representative Christy Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Body, I ask you to oppose this amendment of almost $600 million to special education funding that has already passed the House floor. If you recall, last week, we had an opportunity to add $72 million to special education funding, and we did pass this exact amount from the House floor. I am proud to have been one of those that were part of that passage of special education funding. And to remove it from the next fiscal year would be an irresponsibility since we already funded it in another provision that passed the House floor. So, body, I ask that you stand with me and oppose this amendment. Thank you.
To speak on the amendment, the chair recognizes Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And body, I know you're going to find this as a surprise that I support this amendment. I think with the narrow margin that SB 83 passed this chamber by, the uncertainty of that bill at this time, I think it'd be nice to get our special education funding in with our K-12 per pupil funding. So I'd urge your support for this amendment. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Landwehr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would also ask that you oppose this. Keep in mind, $600 million. Where do we get $600 million? I'll tell you where you get it. Foster care, nursing homes, HCBS waivers, IDD population. The list goes on and on and on. It goes back to what the attorney for the school districts that sued the state said. Other budgets will suffer. This is an irresponsible amendment on this floor. I think that the bill that we passed out last week, it takes us a step forward, gives us time to actually study what's going on and find out why some people get 200+% on special education. And that's why we did what we did in the committee. But ask yourself, where does $600 million come from? And if you don't care, then you support this amendment. But if you do care about other areas of the budget, you'll vote no. Thank you.
Is there further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, Representative Poskin, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's always been interesting to me to hear the carry of the bills and the speakers to the amendment, whether an amendment is considered friendly or not. I want you to consider who this amendment is friendly to. It is friendly to the Kansas families who rely on special education services, To the children who were here yesterday that you took pictures with, I heard that vicariously since I was missing yesterday. Is it friendly to school districts like Olathe Public Schools at 60% reimbursement, thank you, Mr. Chair, of excess special education costs when our statute calls for 92%? Is it friendly to our general education students whose funding is diminished to cover that shortfall? Come on. Is it friendly to our colleagues who have promised constituents that they will support increased special education funding but could not support the underlying bill in Senate Bill 83? Remember when I said we would have other chances to fund special education? Well, colleagues, here it is. We know that the Senate took special education funding out of their budget recommendation, so we can't count on them to keep it in Senate Bill 83 during conference. Please join me in putting back a critically missing piece of Senate Bill 113, special education funding, at a level already approved by the K-12 Budget Committee, back where it belongs. I close.
You've heard the motion by Representative Poskin to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The noes appear to have it. The division's been called. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote. Roll call has been called. Seeing 15 hands, roll call is in order. Has every member had an opportunity to vote? The clerk will close the roll. Does any member wish to change their vote? Seeing none, with 39 voting in favor and 82 against, the motion fails. We are back on the bill. To speak on the bill, the chair recognizes Representative Probst.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I get to my business, I was going to say I've been watching the goings on in the Senate this week, and every time I do, it makes me happy to be over here. With that, I have an amendment.
The amendment is short. The clerk will read.
Page 3 and line 41 after the semicolon by inserting acquisition of naloxone hydrochloride products for use by approved professionals. Sorry.
This does, in the original budget that came down, there was a provision that allowed the schools to purchase naloxone or Narcan with the Safe and Secure grant money. And I don't know if some of you that weren't here, maybe we don't remember, a few years ago, we established a $5 million grant program to schools where they could apply to keep students safe and to make schools safe. And it was done at the time with the intent of gun violence in schools. But I would argue that some schools, gun violence may not be the biggest threat to children. It may be opioid overdose. It's getting more common for schools to have these in place and to keep these in their buildings and to have trained professionals on staff to handle them. And so what this would do would be restore this back into the budget. It was taken out, and this would allow schools to use that grant funding to purchase Narcan. I'd stand for questions.
Does any member wish to speak to the amendment? The chair recognizes Representative Christy Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I do appreciate the amendment and the thought behind the amendment. Originally, in the governor's budget, she did provide language that included the Narcan. She also provided language for the Safe and Secures grant, the one-to-one grant of $5 million to add communications. And that was a good suggestion and a good add, and we did include the governor's recommendation for communication. But the idea of the Safe and Secure grant is to make sure our buildings are safe, structurally safe, that our communication systems are in operation. And also, we added last year, if you add a new SRO officer, that would also be or qualify for funding. The Narcan is about $20 a bottle, and we have over 600 schools, and easily we could start expending a lot of money on something that might expire, that is going to need to be updated annually. And I don't think that that's a safety provision for Safe and Secures. It is a mental health issue, but not quite the same. For those reasons, to say stay true to the Safe and Secure grant, I would ask the body to reject this amendment. And thank you for bringing it.
Is there further discussion on the amendment? Chair recognizes Representative Boyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Body, I rise in support of this amendment. I can tell you in my district alone, we are using this in our schools. We are using this device to revive our students who are overdosing in our buildings. It's a critical tool that we need to continue to help and make sure that our kids are healthy, they're safe, and they are secure. It's vitally important. And I find it ironic that we're having to beg for tools and resources that literally is saving the life of children in schools. Without it, how do we do that? The problem is there. We need this tool and this resource to address the problem. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Seeing no further discussion on the amendment, Representative Probst, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I'll restate what I mentioned before, that I think we have to acknowledge that in some school districts and in some buildings, the biggest threat facing students is opioids. And if we can use funding that's already established, and I wish that I had looked this up before, but I didn't. I don't know if we're actually using all of that money. I don't know if schools have currently used that money that's in the budget. But I would argue that this is a good use of available funding for students. You know, there are stories, there was just another one this week about a 15-year-old boy who died from taking what he thought was half a Percocet that had fentanyl in it. And everyone, it's very well established where I am on that. You have conversations with law enforcement, school officials, they will tell you if they don't have Narcan in their buildings, there would be more overdose deaths among teenagers. This is a pervasive problem. I would argue right now, it's a more prevalent problem than anything else facing students. So I would ask you to support this amendment. And before I close and move my amendment, I will say on the back end of this, I do appreciate the thoughtfulness of this body. I see the way we approach our work, and I see the way the other side approaches its work. And I am happy to be on the side that tends to be a little more compassionate, to be a little more thoughtful, and a little more deliberate in its work. With that, I move my amendment.
You've heard the motion by Representative Probst to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The noes appear to have it. Division's been called. The clerk will open the roll, and you may record your vote. Seeing 15 hands, roll call is in order. Has every member had an opportunity to record their vote? The clerk will close the roll. With 48 voting in favor and, oh, pardon. Are there any changes of vote? Representative Bloom votes no. Are there any further changes of vote? Representative Seiwert votes no. Representative Blue votes aye. Any further changes? Seeing none, with 49 voting in favor and 72 against, the motion fails. We are back on the bill. To speak to the bill, the chair recognizes Representative Clifford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Those of us who represent Southwest Kansas have a huge number of at-risk students. In the bill in front of you, we're sunsetting the high-density weighting portion as of next June 30th of 2024. For our school districts, our superintendents, the folks who manage our schools, they need budget certainty. They have budgeted this money for 2020, beginning July 1st this year. But as they go into this next budget cycle, they'll have no idea if this high-density weighting money is coming. These are real numbers. Dodge City, $2.5 million. Garden City, $2.157 million. Liberal, $1.6 million. And Ulysses, proportionally, it's a big number, $440,000. And I could tell you the Salina number as well, but I'm here representing Southwest Kansas. So, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment.
The amendment appears long. Is there objection to waiving the reading of the amendment? Oh. Representative Clifford, would you care to explain your amendment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. All I'm doing here is extending this high-density weighting for 1 year to 2025. I really think, for the sake of budget certainty, we owe it to our school districts to extend the sunset even further. But in the spirit of compromise, this amendment will extend it by 1 year to 2025.
Is there objection to waiving the reading of the amendment? Seeing none, Representative Clifford, are you ready for questions?
Yes, I am, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. To speak to the amendment, the chair recognizes Representative Williams.
Hello, Representative. So by extending the sunset this year rather than next year, which would have been something we would have looked at next year, we all come back, would that increase funding and how much would it increase?
I'm sure you know the number. I do not, but it's a number with which our districts are very familiar. If you'll permit me to look at the paper I'm holding, I might have a number for you.
Don't worry, don't worry. That's not fair for the budget chair to ask that question. It's 76 million, so I'm not sure, but this may violate PAYGO because it would require the increase of $76 million. Could we, at this point, I would ask for a ruling on that.
The issue of PAYGO has been arisen. Chair will look to the rules chair for a ruling on PAYGO. The chair recognizes Representative Patton for a ruling.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Body, I apologize for taking a little longer. This wasn't as clear to us as the last one. But as we look through this, ultimately, I determined that this amendment would result in the net effect would be an increase in spending out of the state foundation aid account. And because there was not an offset, my decision is that this would not be in order because it violates Rule 2110. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The ruling is that the amendment violates PAYGO. We are back on the bill. Representative Clifford, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would sincerely hope that this would at least get to conference. It's very important for our Southwest Kansas districts. I appreciate your attention, and I'll yield. Thank you.
To speak to the bill, the chair recognizes Representative Stogstill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would the carrier of the bill stand for a couple of questions, please? Right. I had a question about the non-public school students' participation in KSHA activities. And it says in the bill here, the bill would allow any non-public school student to participate in any activities offered by a school district that are regulated, supervised, promoted, so on and so on by the High School Activities Association. And since that, they have to meet the following requirements, and that's one, is enrolled in attending a non-public elementary or secondary school. Does that include homeschools?
Yes.
Okay, maybe that should be added to that because I think that's confusing. Then it also says pays any fees required by the school district for participation in such activity, correct?
Yes.
So do those fees pay for locker rooms, playing fields, equipment, coaches' salaries?
So right now, currently, our school districts will charge an activities fee. It depends district by district. So in my district, if you want to play in an athletic sport, then it's $50 fee. Whatever you would charge a public school student, you may also charge a non-public school student.
Okay, but the money we send to those school districts also helps pay for those locker rooms, playing fields, equipment, and coaches' salaries. Those fees don't. So those kids that are coming in from private schools, home schools, and so on like that, they're paying the fees, but they're not also paying the money that public schools have to spend on these locker rooms and playing fields and equipment and coaches' salaries.
Well, I'd actually disagree with that because all taxpayers pay local property tax. It can be as much as 40% locally. And in that sense, they are paying their amount and in fact, getting a very small benefit back for those taxes that they are paying.
Okay, and I was just curious, I didn't hear the testimony, but I was just wondering why this bill was opposed by the Central Kansas League of Superintendents, the Kansas Association of Independent and Religious Schools, Kansas Association of School Boards, Kansas State Board of Education, Kansas State High School Activity Association, and the Kansas State Parent Teacher Association. What was their complaint? Why did they oppose this bill?
Well, for those that actually spoke in committee, and I will speak specifically of KSHA, a lot of times our organizations and our agencies are looking out more for the establishment, the bureaucracy, and the structure rather than the individual child. Denying a child that lives in a district who has guardians that pay property tax the opportunity to participate in KSHA activities is not best for the child. So this provision in the bill actually directs for what is best for the child.
Okay, I just assumed that our superintendents are independent religious schools, our school boards, our State Board of Education, our High School Athletic Association, and our State Parent Teacher Association probably have a pretty good interest in protecting the interest of our students across Kansas.
Well, I would actually say that we have seen time and time again that many times agencies, entities, organizations often are more about the structure of their entity than they are about the individual child. And so I stand that every child in Kansas should have an opportunity to participate in KSHA activities, whether it's debate or whether it's a small team in Western Kansas that doesn't have enough students that are in public school. They should have an opportunity.
Okay, thank you, Representative. I just was pointing out it just seems strange to me that all of these organizations across Kansas that have the best interest of our students in mind and are elected by the same people who elect us in most cases would oppose this bill, while the main proponents of this bill seem to be Americans for Prosperity, Kansas Policy Institute, Kansas Family Voice. I would submit that the school boards, the parents, parent-teacher associations, our teachers and so on that oppose this bill probably have a better interest in all of our students across Kansas and than maybe some of the proponents for this. I just highly object to this part of the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
To speak to the bill, the chair recognizes Representative Nguyen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would the carrier stand for a question, please? Would you help the body understand the section on COLA?
I sure will. So currently, right now, we have 20 school districts that have the opportunity because their home values are 125% higher than the average in Kansas. So this request was, since it does not require anything from the funding formula, it's a local mill levy only, to provide more salary increases for those areas such as the Blue Valley School District, in which the home values are exceedingly high. Actually, about $500,000 is the average home value in Blue Valley compared to $170,000 statewide. And because of that, it makes it more challenging to hire teachers and paras, and they'd like to actually implement through resolution and a vote of their school board an increase that would be local only. So taking it from about $10 million additional money to pay for the paras and teachers to, I believe, about $12 to $15 million. It's an increase, and I do have those numbers. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is that we would actually take that threshold from 125 to 115%, but also the percentage that they will receive, as you know, it actually goes from 5 to 7%.
Okay. So is there any compensation in the formula for low property value schools that
So right now, if you are a community that has a low average valuation per pupil, we have 3 formulas that address this and give greater state aid to those schools that have a low average valuation per pupil. And I could list those 3 for you. In addition, if you are a school that has low enrollment, you get twice the money per pupil than you would if you had a higher enrollment. So there are lots of things that we do in this formula to help those schools that are more distressed.
So the real question was, if you allow your higher property value districts to be able to raise more money, and this is not a vote of the people, right?
This is a resolution done through their elected local school board, and they must vote on their resolution.
People vote on the resolution, or the school board votes on the resolution?
School board votes on the resolution.
All I have to do is publish it. Now, are you saying there's a compensation, a balance with these other provisions, is there direct correlation?
Sure, thank you for the question. There's actually lots of balances to it.
Is there direct correlation?
There is a direct correlation, and one would be, for example, your local option budget. That is based on average valuation per pupil. Average valuation per pupil, if you have low home prices, if that averages out with your student number, your enrollment, you will receive more state aid for LOB.
Okay.
The same is true for your capital outlay. Each of us in our communities, we pay 8 additional mills. I believe all of our schools go up to that cap, but they can have an additional amount, again, based on average valuation per pupil. So it really is about the assessed valuation per the number of students. Finally, there is the capital improvement. So we spend about $205 million a year to provide extra dollars to those bond and interest payments, and that, again, is based on average valuation per pupil. So we are constantly in the state of Kansas providing more distressed communities with more money. In addition to that, some communities have high density at-risk weighting and some do not. Blue Valley has very, very low amounts of high density at-risk funds and title schools. Therefore, during the pandemic, they might have received $5 million, where some school districts might have received
$80 million.
$129 million.
Okay, thank you. Well, of course, I believe your eyes probably glazed over from that explanation. No? Okay. Nevertheless, House substitute for Senate Bill 113, in the words of Forrest Gump, is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get, because this is a bundle. And for the newer people, the bundle of 9 bills into the budget is a challenge for me to support. Now, the past speakers with the amendments, you rejected those. And those are the empty wrappers in your box of chocolates. And what else is in the good chocolate is the budget. The good chocolate is a 20 mil statewide levy that you have to have. The good chocolate is the funding for 25 for SPED. But there are a lot of, when you open that box of chocolates, there are a lot of empty wrappers. And let me share with you why those empty wrappers impact our schools. What was taken out of this budget? $1.9 million for professional development enhancement. How are you going to teach teachers to learn how to engage different students with different challenges? Empty wrapper, $1.9 million professional development. Took out $1 million for mentor teacher program. I believe many of the supporters of the bill, that was their baby. They tossed that piece of chocolate out. You didn't want Narcan in the safe and secure grant proviso? Empty wrapper. You didn't want the last amendment. That was not anything dealing with funding. That was saying, tell you what, as the gentleman said, let's secure. You always talk about wanting to know what you're gonna do. Didn't want that, empty wrapper. And you didn't want the SPED, empty wrapper. A lot of the provisions in these bills that were bundled never got a public hearing. The one thing that really is bitter in my mouth is this COLA. Now, the long explanation that the carrier gave went over your head. Because at the end of the day, it means those high property value school districts can raise the taxes on their residents a resolution. I'm on the school board, okay? So every July, August, we get a budget. You set your budget, you publish it. You say, I'm going to raise your local option budget by certain mills. The mill in your country, your district may raise 6 million, 2 million. The mill in my district raised 600,000. So that game of telling me, oh yeah, you can raise your mill and I'm going to give you a little bit extra here, that's malarkey and baloney. Okay? But at the end of the day, that COLA expands from 21 districts to 27 districts. It used to be the Sweet 16. Congratulations to K-State, by the way. But it used to be the Sweet 16 who could raise their property values. You know, listen to what I'm saying, folks. You want to pay teachers higher wages because they live in districts that cost higher money, more money to live. Fine, you got that. You allow them to tax their people at a higher rate. Fine, you got that. What the carrier didn't tell you, when you cap this, when you pop this cap, you pop the cap off of what you can charge your people forever. Read the bill. The bill says, for school year 24-25 and each school year thereafter. Till it freezes over, I guess. The amount of the cost of living waiting cap for the immediate preceding school year plus an amount equal to the average percentage increase in the consumer price index, blah, 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 blah. But you pop the cap of what you can charge tax your people by publishing a budget. It doesn't go to the vote of the people. Sure, now you can vote me out. No sweat. But by the way, there's also in here, you can pay me. There's a bill that said you can pay your school board members, but you didn't put any more money in there. So it's either pay the school board members or not pay the teachers, or not buy curriculum, okay? These are the empty wrappers I'm talking about that irritate, that leaves that nasty taste in my mouth. You got the good chocolate? Stop eating while you can. There's a section here about the mental health intervention team. Solid program, limited to community health centers. If you have programs that you have different contracts with, you can't participate in this. Empty wrapper. You already talked about the non-public school student who doesn't, for whatever reason, want to go to your school, but wants to participate in your activities. Got it. The parent portal. Now here's a section of the bill, I don't know if you read it or not. Puts it on the administration. No argument really, people. You want to know what your child is learning. But it's only for the public school. It doesn't apply to your private school. And you're already, oh, we're gonna give all this to the private schools. But you're not holding them accountable as well. There's a section of the bill talks about homelessness and homeless students. Very serious issue. You don't provide transportation. We provide a lot of revenue to provide that transportation for that student so that if they started in your district, they may now live in Grandview, Missouri, we go back and get them. That's lacking, empty wrapper. And then I already told you about the COLA. It's not the, it's not the bitter chocolate. It's the one that shows a real disparity. And there are attempts to address the disparities, but to allow, which we didn't even have a hearing on it. And a lot of these bills did not have public hearings. So there was no public input, but it's okay. It's okay for you. It's not okay for me. But the disparities that allow the Sweet 16 that turned into Sweet 21, that turned in now to Sweet 27, to be able to tax their people on the pretense, I've got to hire teachers. We all have to hire teachers. And hey, guess the luck of the Irish, okay? My county is adjacent to one of the richest counties in the nation. Our district, the county, has 4 school districts. 90% of the teachers in all the districts live in the rich county. So the response could be, would you just pay your teachers more? Okay. They don't have the tax base. You do the math. This is the thing for this K-12. You do the math. Your mill raises 2 million, 1 mill. My mill raises 600,000. Do the math. You're not solving teacher shortages. You're not solving student achievement. There's nothing in this bill that talks about student achievement. So I tell you what, you take your box of chocolates. My box of chocolates has about like 3 pieces of candy in it. And I open it up and I got empty wrappers. So needless to say, I oppose Senate Bill 113. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there further discussion on the bill? Chair recognizes Representative Haskins.
Would the carrier of the bill please stand for some questions? I promise I won't be as long as the last time. But help me understand. The governor's budget was about 153 million more than what this is. Is that correct?
Well, it depends on what you're including. There are some provisions we did not include. In this particular budget, the special education funding was moved and put in a different bill that was already passed so therefore it was not included in this bill.
So if that bill doesn't go through, does special education lose money for next year?
This body has always funded special education and has met our constitutional obligation and will do so again this year. I cannot project what another chamber or what someone will do on the second floor relating to something that we have passed.
So if it doesn't pass, then we'll still pay for special education.
Our body has always fully constitutionally funded since the time that we have been here, that I've been here.
What new money has been allotted for special education?
There's $72.3 million that was added for fiscal year 2025. And in a previous bill that passed the chamber, there was another additional $72.3 million.
I guess here's the question I get all the time. Do we have a budget surplus?
So right now we have about $3 billion of surplus, but we do have projections that we could also be about -2 billion or $1 billion, depending on what our out years are going to look like.
So if we have 3 and we have a net of -2, that's still $1 billion. I guess my question is, why aren't we fully funding special education?
We are fully funding special education. In addition to that, we need to be sure through the task force for special education funding that we re-examine a very flawed formula. If our districts understand, we have 286 school districts, and of those, 149 exceed excess cost. Until we can right the equity between the school districts, in which some get 300% and some get 55%, then I think that we have a problem. We can't just add more money to a flawed formula. But in a bipartisan effort, we added an additional 72 while we have a special education funding task force to review what we already know to be true. There are problems in the formula.
Okay. All right, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, one last question. How do non-public school students become eligible to play sports? Because I'm pretty sure you have to have a GPA requirement and have to be active. How does that work?
Correct. You know what? In our public schools right now, I believe KSHA makes all public school students have at least a D average. So in the homeschool or non-public school, I would suspect if we wanted parallel requirements, then those students would have to be barely passing. But in most homeschools, that's not the case. And right here on page 17, it does specify that they are showing that they are mastering their material, maintaining satisfactory progress, and the parent or the school provides an affidavit providing this type of information, which I think is very significant.
So you're suggesting that the parent offers a transcript to the school? I mean, how do they verify that?
An affidavit would be something that you would have notarized, and you would say that it is true by your word. You are professing that it is true. A school would provide, if it's a non-public school, a micro school, they could provide an official transcript.
Okay. Thank you very much. Colleagues, as a freshman, I'm learning something every day. And I've put together budgets for businesses, for higher ed institutions. Never have I ever seen that in a budget we're going to add policy language about sports, or that we are going to have a parents portal. It doesn't make sense to me as far as why we have to embed special interest policies into a budget bill that we have a surplus of money in which we could stop the bickering and fully fund what the carrier said, the education of our children. But yet we want to use space to talk about making sure non-public school students can play high school sports in the public school system. And I also, folks, Topeka is my home, and I'm proud of it. And I do not mean anything, I don't mean to be overly critical of this, but I don't know if, as a freshman, I'm noticing a trend. If you live in Overland Park, if you live in Wichita, all the money goes to you. We talked about that last week with the voucher bills. All the money goes to you. And that's great. Winner, winner. Chicken dinner. I don't understand why my colleagues from rural areas, the 63 counties that don't have private schools, why aren't we asking more questions? It is obvious that schools in St. John, Kansas is the most important entity in that community. But I don't have assurances that St. John will still be a school in 10 years, because we're not asking any questions related to the rural school districts. And folks, they represent more than the majority of our state. The last thing I will just state is, when it comes to self-reporting non-public school scores, I know they lead with good intentions, but as a director of admissions of a Washburn University, I have been a recipient of a homeschool transcript in which the parent came in and said, I just reassessed my daughter's biology course in her sophomore year. The parent said, I just reassessed my daughter's biology course grade sophomore year, and originally she got a B, but after reassessing it, and she is now a senior, she got an A. And here's the new transcript. It's been notarized. That switch of the grade moved her from a $500 academic scholarship a year to a $1,000 academic scholarship a year. You have to have accountability and assurances when it comes to public dollars. If you leave it to just the human will, you will find that students, parents, humans overall will do what is in their best interests. Please don't vote for this bill. There are too many questions. We need to do a better job with our budgets. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is there any further discussion on the bill? Chair recognizes Representative Younger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I'd really like to walk down here and support an education bill. I feel like Forrest Gump, my friend from Kansas City. I had that written down, and because I'm really a simple man. I like to follow the KISS philosophy. Keep it simple. This isn't simple. There's bad policy in an education budget. And for that, I will vote no on Senate Bill 113. Thank you.
Is there further discussion? The chair recognizes Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, body, for your indulgence and the good discussion. I didn't bring any paper down here with me. I don't have any amendments. The reason I didn't bring any paper down here with me is there are so many holes in this bill, there's no paper left. If you take away, as an example, funding for teacher education, and we are all sitting here and saying, our teachers need to be better educated, are we giving them the tools? The answer in this bill is no. If we have teachers leaving the business, a teacher stays somewhere between 1 and 3 years. Those are beginning teachers. If they have mentors who can help them and give them suggestions and they can learn from that, we don't lose them like that. One of the other big factors is the types of discussions that we're having here today, where we say, you know, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you teach. We're not going to require any responsibility from homeschools. So why should we require anybody to be the best they can be in a classroom? Why are we paying homeschoolers with no accountability piece? We don't do that in our homes when we pay bills. There's accountability. We don't do that when we make purchases, because there has to be an accountability. There has to be something of value that you are getting for that. I would like to ask the carrier of the bill just 2 quick questions, if I may. Thank you. How many districts have reached their upper limit of the mills they can raise?
The meals?
Mills.
Oh, pretty much all of them. It depends if you mean the capital outlay, which is 8, which I believe every school district is at that level, or if it means LOB, which is a percentage. Everyone's between about 31 and 33%.
Okay, so tell me how those districts are going to be able to raise additional money if they are at their 31 mils.
Why would they need to, I'm not, so you may need to rephrase your question. I'm not sure what you're asking. Why would they need to raise additional money when we're adding $600 million in the past 2 years? In fact, we're giving them a 5.3% increase. So I'm not sure the question. You may need to rephrase it.
All right, you spoke about giving teachers COLA. You spoke about the ability to raise local funds to do that.
Sure. So actually, that was what the testimony provided to our committee said, that they would like to use that additional mill levy to pay teachers more. That actually is a local decision, does not affect the overall funding formula. They can have their own resolution, pass the resolution, and increase the local mill levy. If this bill were to be successful, we would have 27 school districts that would be able to implement the COLA as per the bill.
And how many school districts do we currently have in Kansas?
286.
27 is a very small amount, would you agree?
20,
Would you agree, yes or no?
20 to 27, either way, it's outside the funding formula and is constitutional.
That's not what I asked. Is 27 a lower number, a small part of that 200 number?
Every student and
Yes
every
or
school
no?
you help
That's
is
not
a
what I
benefit
asked.
for
I
them.
would like for you to answer the question.
Well, I'm pretty sure we can all do the math, and I do believe 20 is less than 27, which is less than 286.
All right, that's all I asked. Thank you very much. I thought maybe she had a math problem. It is obvious that we are looking at 27, and we have hundreds of other school districts out there that do not have that same ability. Folks, we complain in here that the teachers aren't doing the job. This bill takes away everything they have to do that. When you teach your child to drive, do you take away the car? No. Do you hire a driver's ed teacher, or maybe one of the parents is absolutely wonderful? Yes, because those are tools that are needed to complete the task. When I talk about respect for teachers, this is what I'm talking about. We want them to be better. We say we want them to be better, but we do not want to give them the tools. And yet we will pay homeschoolers, and it's fine to be a homeschool student. I am not saying that at all. I agree that any parent has the right to send their child or educate their child wherever they would like. But it's a choice. And when they have made that choice, and you look at all the people who are against this bill, who are in the educational field every day, not just the administrators, teachers, paras, aides, nurses, librarians, counselors. We are not doing our job with this bill, and I ask you to vote no. Thank you.
Is there further discussion on the bill? Chair recognizes Representative Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the carrier of the bill, stand for questions, please. On page 17 of the bill, line 15 through 18, it talks about homeschool children have to be academically eligible. What if the school requires that one of those eligibilities or criteria is CRT or sex education or something that a homeschool parent does not want, thus the reason why they're homeschool or private?
So the school doesn't get to determine the curriculum eligibility. It does get to determine the grade point eligibility. So if a school district has a higher standard than KSHA, then that may also affect the individual homeschool. And many homeschools, or most, especially those that participate with KSHA eligible association of events and activities, do have transcripts and can provide those transcripts. It is not dependent on subject matter. It is dependent on their grade point average.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Seeing no further discussion on the bill, Representative Williams, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did want to address a couple of topics before I briefly close. First of all, every single item that you find in this bill today did have a formal hearing or it had a budget formal testimony. As a budget committee, we take recommendations, we hear from individual schools and from associations, and so every single item either had a formal hearing or formal testimony. In addition to that, when we talk about rural schools and what do rural schools get out of the funding formula, we actually protect our rural schools, and we have a low student enrollment weighting that gives double the amount that we would give to high enrollment. So one student, if they were in a very small school, would count as 2 students. So we very much protect our smaller schools, and including the high density at risk, which also applies to smaller schools. But in closing, Kansas has a long-standing tradition of adequately funding our public schools, despite a long-standing tradition of inaccurate reports otherwise. Using Kansas Department of Education numbers provided by legislative research, please let these numbers sink in. In the past 2 decades, taxpayers in Kansas have increased overall K through 12 education funding per pupil by 135.3%, while in the same time frame, the Midwest CPIU rose by only 67.4%. This illustrates that K-12 funding has exceeded the rate of inflation, even taking into account those very difficult recession years. With our steadfast financial commitment in Kansas, the legislature maintains the tradition of coupling constitutional funding with policy to ensure ongoing accountability, ongoing transparency, and bipartisan efforts to expand educational opportunities for all Kansas students. Mr. Chair, I move that when the committee rises and reports, it report House Sub for Senate Bill 113 favorably for passage.
Body, you've heard the motion by Representative Williams to report Senate Bill 113 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Division's been called. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote. Has every member had an opportunity to record their vote? The clerk will close the roll. With 78 voting in favor and 39 against, the motion carries. The next item of business is House Bill 2436. For the purpose of carrying House Bill 2436, the chair recognizes Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There were committee amendments. I move adoption of the committee report.
You've heard the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries and the committee report is adopted. You may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Body, I bring before you today HB 2436, which would establish the Kansas Public Investments and Contracts Protection Act. What we're seeing around the country now is we're seeing governments weaponize and use pension systems and government contracts to further their ideological agendas. So what we want to do in the state of Kansas is make sure that all our investments, all of our pensions, and all of our contracts are considered with the fiduciary responsibility, and that's it. So we have this bill today. Section 1 has our definitions in it. Section 2 basically states that the state, its agencies, or political subdivisions, this allows them from discriminating against or giving preferential treatment to bidders, contractors, subcontractors based on ESG criteria. Section 3 is our a proxy fix. It's going to allow us to take our proxy votes right now. The CAPERS, when we invest in our money management, they have our proxy votes and they get to use them however they want. We are actually going to hire an outside proxy service to vote our proxy votes the way the state of Kansas wants them to. Section 4 prohibits state agencies from sharing or publishing information, adopting laws, promulgating rules, or issuing guidance that restricts the ability of any industry to offer products or services based on ESG criteria. Section 5 is the enforcement mechanism that allows the Attorney General to require statements or reports from persons engaged in or about to engage in violations of the law. Section 6 holds harmless our actual CAPERS system in case they get sued, and the state will come in and defend the CAPERS system or our CAPERS employees. And Section 7 just makes one small change to our already CAPERS statute, our Kansas Public Employees Retirement System statute. And with that, and oh, I do want to address the fiscal note. So the original fiscal note was $3.6 billion, pretty shocking, just a couple of dollars. We did work with our state treasurer as well as Alan Conroy, with the executive director of CAPERS, to get that down. We did amend this in committee to shrink that fiscal note. Alan Conroy gave us an estimate of about $800,000 would be the new fiscal note. And with that, Mr. Chair, I will stand for questions.
Speak to the bill. The chair recognizes Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. Would the carrier come for a question or two?
Yes, sir.
We're talking about ESG, but what
Yes,
is
sir.
it?
Environmental, social, and governance is what ESG stands for.
And what does it do?
So ESG is a criteria, it's a score that some companies use. They take into account, are you good on the environment? Are you good on social issues? Are you good on corporate governance issues?
Okay. Is it political in nature? Is it
Representative
policy?
Murphy,
Is it just a score?
would you speak into the microphone a little bit better, please?
Is it policy? Is it political, or is it just a score, or what?
It's a score, but it's a score that can be used to pursue an ideological agenda of folks who want to interpret that score on either way.
Okay, thank you. Okay, those are good answers. We're going to do a little bit of history lesson, though. We're all familiar with the FICO score. FICO's got a formula so that everybody who gets a FICO score was looked at the exact same way. And FICO, of course, is used when you go to borrow money, buy a car, buy a house, get insurance, whatever like that. It helps determine your rates. And the reason for that is because it's your ability to pay. It's a financial thing. And it protects the financial interests of the institution, or in the case of, say, renting a property, it would, protect the landowner. So what's the purpose of an ESG score? Perhaps we should look how it all began. In 2004, the UN had a report, Who Cares Wins, and introduced a principle suggesting that profits could be obtained by putting emphasis on environmental and social progress. The task of defining these broad categories is left to international institutions. These institutions determine environmental would focus on CO2 reduction goals, while social would mean anything related to UN's stated issues such as gender parity, racial justice, and poverty reduction. So from the goal to start was to harmonize the priorities of politics with business. The World Economic Forum has long held sway in Europe, but up till then, shareholders in the United States were still stood on top. In 2007, the UN invited financial institutions to sign on to principles for responsible investment. Total global assets at that time were $10 trillion. By 2020, this has grown to over $30 trillion. At this rate, by 2025, it's estimated it'll be $53 trillion. That's a lot of clout. In the early 1980s, rules were changed allowing for proxy voting. It's difficult for people who are shareholders and companies to go to meetings and cast their votes. And so this seemed like something that was nice, that would make it easy. But it's something that was soon exploited. In 2020, BlackRock voted at 16,200 shareholder meetings on 153,000 company proposals. According to their report in 2020, they identified 244 companies that were not making sufficient progress in their view, and they took action on 53 of them and put the rest on notice that if they didn't do what they wanted, they would take action on them as well. So it looks like an investment policy. So if it's investment, how have investors fared? Well, it doesn't seem it's all that well. The Harvard Business Review did a report, said to begin with, ESG funds certainly perform poorly in financial terms. In a recent Journal of Finance paper, University of Chicago researchers analyzing Morningstar sustainability ratings of more than 20,000 mutual funds representing over 8 trillion investor savings. Although the highest rated funds in terms of sustainability attracted more capital, none of the high sustainability funds outperformed any of the lower rated funds. You might expect that result, and then investors might even say, well, but it's important that I protect the environment, so I want to invest in it anyway. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to do much for that either. An example of how pervasive this is about, I think it was last month, there was a training in Kansas City that was put on by the NRECA, our electric co-ops. The training was built on the idea of putting members and customers first. But then they spoke about the global shift away from fossil-based energy to renewable energy sources. They then quoted Public Utilities fortnightly editor Steve Mitnick when he said, in what could be called the ESG era, utilities are being scored for their ethical performance quite rigorously and quite comprehensively by highly influential organizations. And these scores are directly driving the financial community to invest significantly more in the high scores and significantly less in the low scores. It then goes on to teach how to convince CEO and customers that it's in their best interest to make this move. I'm sorry, I kind of thought the best interest of customers was reliable energy and low prices. Not a political statement. So who determines a company's ESG score? The ESG ratings industry is highly fragmented. There are dozens of ratings agencies and data providers in existence. The backgrounds of these firms are not uniform, and with many having entered the ESG ratings business from different areas of historical experience. So an ESG rating is really based on someone's idea or political view at the time. Is this how we protect the free market? And then what are the individual ESG scores? On a personal level, the arbitrary ESG score is assigned to you will affect your ability to obtain loans and other services, affect your interest rate or level of service. The state should have full control over the funds it invests on behalf of its citizens and retirees, and Kansans should not have to worry about their ability to get a loan or buy insurance based on anything other than their ability to pay. I recently heard of a constituent who was denied insurance due to their low ESG score. What will farmers, ranchers, oil and gas, gun dealers, manufacturers do in the future when this becomes more prevalent? So who does an ESG score protect? Well, the answer is whoever they decide they want to protect. Recently, ExxonMobil, oil and gas, big, huge company, scored higher with an ESG score than Tesla. And of course, that happened after Elon Musk bought Twitter, and so they had to show him that he had fallen out of favor. So you see the real meaning for ESG scores. Many financial institutions are operating on ESG rather than financial. Has anybody been watching the news? I told one of the representative here the other day, I said, Silicon Valley Bank had touted their goal was to be carbon neutral by 2025. They beat that estimate by going dark last month. ESG is a political policy. We need to take the politics out of the free market. Let's look at another example. If you look at coal-fired energy plants, those are the bad boy of the industry, right? If we look at 8 areas around the world, EU, Turkey, South Africa, India, the Philippines, South Korea, Japan, and China, there are 3,644 coal plants. They have plans to build nearly 2,000 more. The United States has 229, and each one of them is in danger of being closed down at any time. And all that does is reduce your ability to turn on your lights and increases your price. 4% of the world's total, if we shut them all down, we're not going to change anything in the climate. In 1773, the colonies had a contentious relationship with the East India Company. This public-private partnership with King George and the Parliament gave the East India Company a distinct advantage over other shipping companies. The 342 chests of tea that were thrown into the harbor during the Boston Tea Party did not belong to King George. It belonged to the East India Company. Our native son, Ike Eisenhower, delivered a farewell address, including his famous warning about increasing the power of the military-industrial complex. While he well understood the importance of a strong military deterrence against the Soviet threat, his warning was that we not let the people who stood to gain so much financially in the production of military hardware be the ones who are making the decisions. The diplomacy should be an important part. It seems not only did we not heed his warning in that way, we've fallen prey to a myriad of other industrial complexes. We have a medical industrial, pharmaceutical industrial, social media industrial, green energy industrial, academic industrial, and most importantly, for our subject today, financial industrial. When there's tension and potential problems, foreign or domestic, there's big money to be made. These public-private partnerships have led to wealth on the part of some and poverty and death and maiming on others. Well, it's sold to the citizens as necessary for freedom. But is that what it really is? I've learned a lot here in Topeka. I decided to take some of these lessons home. I'm building a new coop and run for my ducks and my chickens. I've got all the supplies. I've got the plans drawn up. But before I start construction, I'm going to call in the coyotes and the bobcats, and the raccoons and the hawks and the owls, and I'm going to get their advice on how I should secure my birds. I think you get the point. I should be able to secure my birds and their right to live and eat and swim and lay eggs, just like we should have a right to protect the rights of Kansans. While the proxy and divestment issues that are addressed in this bill are important, I'd like to add that if this is all we address, we will affect less than 0.2% of the assets of these major investment funds. Hardly going to bring anybody to their knees. What will this accomplish in protecting the rights of Kansas businesses and the citizens? As we watch these recent bank failures, we can see the demise of smaller regional banks and the further growth of larger banks. What sort of a free market choice will we have when there's just 5 or 6 mega banks and maybe just the Fed? Our founders wrote in the Declaration that we're endowed with certain unalienable rights. And we formed government for one reason, is to secure the rights. How much do we do actually here that secures rights? We argue over spending money. I think that's important. We argue over taxes. I think that's important. But our real purpose is to secure the rights of the citizens. If King George allowed the East India Company to deprive or suppress rights, is the use of ESG any different? With that, I have an amendment.
The amendment appears long. Would you like to explain, Representative? Oh, just a moment. Stand at ease, body. We may be ready.
Excuse me, I'm a rookie.
Okay, Representative, you may explain your amendment.
Okay, the amendment's pretty simple. When the original bill that I had prepared for ESG had 4 parts. This is the last part. I call it an informed consent. And basically all it is if you go to your private investment advisor, they've just got to tell you if they're going to invest in ESG funds or not.
Is there objection to waiving the reading of the amendment? There is objection. The clerk will read.
See, page 1 in line 18 by striking 6 and inserting. They didn't copy. in line 18 by striking 6 and inserting 7. On page 5, following line 30 by inserting new section 6A. A registered investment advisor is defined in KSA 1712A 102 and amendments thereto prior to investing any monies owned by a client shall obtain written consent from such client stating that the client is fully aware of and consents to the investment of monies owned by the client or through any mutual fund, actively or passively managed equity fund, company or financial institution that is using environmental, social, and governance criteria. Such written consent need only be obtained a single time from the client. Such written consent shall consist of the following disclosure. The institution managing this fund is using environmental, social, and governance, ESG criteria. If such ESG criteria is used in managing your fund, these ESG criteria may impact the fund's return compared to the fund's historical performance or the performance of funds that do not use ESG criteria. You may have the option to choose a similar fund that does not use ESG criteria. By signing below, you consent to have your investment managed by this institution, even if the institution uses ESG criteria that may impact your returns compared to historical performance or other funds. B, conduct prohibited by this section shall be considered an act, practice, or course of business that operates or would operate as a fraud or deceit in accordance with KSA 1712A 502 and amendments thereto. Nothing in this section shall be construed to establish any requirements for registration, capital, custody, margin, financial responsibility, making and keeping of records, bonding or financial or operational reporting for a registered investment advisor that differ from the requirements established under federal law to the extent that such requirements are applicable to the registered investment advisor. The requirements of this section shall not apply to annuities managed by an insurance company. D, the provisions of this section or any contract or practice subject to this section may be enforced by the Attorney General. The Attorney General may investigate possible violations of this section in accordance with provisions of KSA 5631 and renumber sections accordingly on page 1 in the title in line 11 after the semicolon by inserting directing registered investment advisors to obtain written consent from clients prior to investing client monies in investments using environmental, social, and governance criteria.
The amendment has been read. Do you wish to further explain your amendment, Representative?
Thank you. Like I said, this simply requires registered financial advisors that they have to notify you in writing if they're going to be using your funds in an ESG-related account. It's not telling them what you can and cannot do with your money. It's just they've got to let you know. We're told that we can't be telling businesses what to do. But I'm not sure how we fix this problem without addressing this issue a little bit. In looking at the way financial advisors are viewed, a recent poll said there's a financial advisor people trust a lot, 2%, trust a little, 15%, mistrust, 65%. There's already a distrust with this organization, with these people. Financial advisors are already required in writing annually to give the types of services offered, schedule of fees, other sources of compensation beyond fees, social affiliations with other advisors and brokers, who provides the service if the advisor works with a larger team, conflicts of interest, education and business background, and any disciplinary action. On top of that, investors are required to consent to the risk of loss of assets and consent to sharing your personal financial information. So if we're going to reduce things, what one of those do you want to cut out? I think most of us here are old enough to remember 2008 and what happened. 2008 crash was a result of infusing a social agenda into our financial industry. And that's what this is. And I think we'd better wake up or we're going to have a real problem. Politics do not belong in our financial industry, and people need to be informed if it is. Stand for questions.
Does any member wish to speak to the amendment? Chair recognizes Representative Silas Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would challenge the germaneness of the amendment.
The germaneness has been challenged. The chair would look to the Rules Chair for a ruling on the challenge. The chair recognizes Representative Patton for a ruling.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Both the bill and the amendment deal with environmental, social, and governance criteria. That's about all we found in common. The scope of the bill is very narrowly focused on public contracts and investments. The word public is used about every paragraph in the bill, whereas the amendment deals with private investment and your private investment advisors. Different chapter, different article, separate question for the body to consider. Given all that, we have determined that the amendment is not germane. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The Rules Chair has ruled the amendment not germane. We are back on the bill. Representative Murphy, you have the floor.
Okay. I appreciate your attention. And this was an effort to do a little education, and I hope we all learned something. Thank you.
To speak to the bill, the chair recognizes Representative Osman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, body, what is it that we're doing here? Sir, body, what is it that we're doing here? As the previous speaker noted, ESG has been around since about the mid-2000s. I think it's been around for about 2 decades. Before that, there's been a lot of corporate governance that deals with, social related issues, even going back to the 70s. You can even have explanations of that going back to the 1700s. You can look at examples of that. This is not anything new, and ESG is not anything new. The only reason that we're here right now is because there's a couple of radio talk show hosts that have gotten this idea that this is a woke leftist agenda that we're suddenly need to rail against. But it's not. As the previous speaker actually noted, there's hundreds of companies that have this, that have this policy for trillions of dollars worth of investments. Like, this is not a fringe group. This is basically a concept. Thank you. This is a concept that you can do good and make money at the same time. And I stress make money because if the companies weren't making money, this policy wouldn't ever go anywhere. Trillions of dollars of investment would not go anywhere if the companies weren't actually making money off of this. But as I said, it is possible to do good and make money at the same time. Case in point, capers. ESG saved the bacon of capers. Last year, Russia invaded Ukraine. And when that happened, a lot of companies pulled out and a lot of other things froze. Investments froze. You could, when you hit a deadline, you couldn't pull out. You locked that investment up behind, call it an iron curtain. And it was impossible to get out for a considerable period of time. Capers had $25 million in it. That is 0.1% of their entire investment portfolio. Why? Because they realized that Russia was a risky investment and they didn't invest more than that. Can you imagine if ESG wasn't in place and they decided 10% of their portfolio sounds like a good divestment strategy and we've locked that up, unable to get it? That is the type of thing that ESG can actually help to make sure that, number one, we're doing good in the world, and number two, we are still making money. We take that away, you take away the ability of your retirement fund to actually do the things it needs to do and to profit the way that it needs to profit. So I urge support. Actually, I urge the removal of this bill. And thank you very much.
To speak to the bill next, the chair recognizes Representative Heiberger.
Well, good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome to day 3 of Culture Wars Week at the Kansas State House. Would the carrier of the bill stand for a couple of questions?
Of course, my friend.
If we adopt this legislation, will we be making a public policy decision or an ideological decision?
We will be making a decision of, we will invest your state funds with the best return on investment and best fiduciary responsibility possible.
Is that a public policy decision or an ideological decision?
I think that's a public policy and an ideological position. Ideologically, I believe, and I think most folks in this chamber, at least on my side, that we should invest public funds with the best return on investment possible.
But we don't like making decisions based on ideological reasons.
I believe that that's inherently impossible to not make decisions on ideological reasons in this chamber or Capitol.
Well, then that seems that this bill might prohibit just about any kind of policy at all in this area. But okay, does this bill make any reference to ESG scores?
I don't believe it says scores. It obviously makes reference to ESG. I'm not sure if it says ESG scores, the actual scores.
So it's substantially broader than just reliance on ESG scores.
Yeah, any ESG criteria.
Okay. Just as a question you can't answer, I'm going to ask anyway. Do you know how many, what percentage of women are on the boards of Fortune 500 companies?
Couldn't tell you.
According to the latest research I did, it's 31% now, up substantially over the last decade.
That's awesome.
And so if a company has a policy that they're trying to increase the percentage of women on their board, could Capers invest in that company?
Yes. They just can't take that into account.
Okay, all right, that's all I got.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to be brief today since we've been here a long time already. But I think it's important to remember that the idea that a corporation has its only responsibility is to maximize return for the shareholders was invented by an economist named Milton Friedman in the Chicago School of Economics in the 1960s. Before that, and even then, it was pretty widely recognized in the corporate world and throughout the society that a corporation does have some public social responsibility. And that began to erode in the 80s. And then that's got us to where we are now. So I've got these notes here that I can't read my own handwriting. Anyway, I think this bill is an overreach. It prohibits local governments from acting on using their investment money to further their public policy goals. Again, we're overreaching, this is overly broad, and I would encourage your vote no.
To speak next to the bill, the chair recognizes Representative Tarwater. And body, I would remind you, although the hour is getting long, let's please provide the appropriate respect and attention to the speakers at the well.
Larney. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'll start out by saying that this bill is a important first step. I do support the bill. I support the idea. I just wish we could have done better, and I felt like we were on a good track to do better at one point. This bill offers one of several solutions that we were talking about, those of us that were helping with the bill. And it is a good start. We're going to be passing, if we pass this today, we're going to pass one of the weakest ESG laws in the country. And I think we can do better. We've got businesses that can't get loans. We've got oil and gas businesses that can't grow. They can't get loans because banks look at their industry, not whether or not they can pay back the loan. And this is just now starting. But we're not addressing that in this bill. It seems like sometimes we try to appease everybody, but we just can't. And it's not easy. It's a narrow road. You've got your constituents and businesses on one side, you got your supporters on another, and it's hard to keep everybody happy. I'm sure we'll get there, and I hope we will next year. So we'll start with this. But I can tell you,
we all have a we all have an ESG score. You just got to find it. And our kids will too. And if we raise our kids with our values, what's going to happen when they fall in love and get married and want to buy a house, but they don't qualify because of a social media post that was too conservative? And what happens when they want to start their own business but can't get a loan because they're too conservative, or they work in the wrong industry? Whatever new industry is going to be wrong when that happens. And so I would have supported any amendment that came today, but the bill is so weak, you can't amend it because it's so narrowly written. I really hope we can do better in the future, but I will support this today, and I hope to build upon it next year. Thank you.
Speak to the bill. The chair recognizes Representative Carmichael.
I'm sorry for the delay, Mr. Chairman. Would the carrier of the bill stand for a brief question? No. Hello, my friend.
How are you?
I just want to ask you hypothetically,
Okay.
if this bill were to become law
Yes.
and the best return on investment available to Capers was from the American White Men's Investment Pool, formerly known as the American Neo-Nazi Investment Pool, would Capers be required to put our teachers and legislators' pension money into the American White Man's Investment Pool?
I don't usually deal with hypotheticals. I do not believe so, but I can double check for you. Would you like?
I appreciate your courtesy. I've made my point. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
To speak to the bill, the chair recognizes Representative Shu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I echo a lot of the sentiments that my colleague from Overland Park said earlier today. This bill doesn't do anything. There's no reason for this bill to need to exist. The only reason that we're doing this today is because this is the latest 3-letter moral panic that right-wing talk radio has created. And so now we feel obligated to come here and do something about it, and that's not how good policy is created. I know I don't have any delusions on how this is going to go today. I've been here long enough, but I do want to make sure that we talk about something that actually does matter in this bill, and that when you guys vote, that we know what we're doing here. If you look at Section 2, I want you guys to really take a look at Section 2 and read it closely, because I think that it really does impact and really constrain what our local cities and counties and school districts and basically any other political subdivision of the state can do with political contracts. And not just for the progressive liberal stuff too. This also applies to potential contracts that conservative cities might want to do. It says that the state, any agency of the state, any political subdivision of the state, et cetera, when engaged in procuring or letting contracts for any purpose, shall ensure that the bidders, offerers, contractors, or subcontractors are not given preferential treatment or discriminated against based solely on ESG criteria. If you refer back to the list of ESG criteria on page 2, it is quite broad. I can imagine lots of scenarios, actually, when maybe a city in western Kansas does want to give preferential treatment to a vendor that engages in ag production. That sounds very appropriate to me, but this bill, as written, I don't think allows for that if that is the sole criteria. There's already conversation too. I was able to add in the word solely into committee, which I think gives them a little bit of leeway. But there's already been a lot of discussion, probably not today, but in conference committee that they'll strip that solely out. And so that means if it touches ag production at all, then our local cities and counties or community colleges can't take that into account. And I think that's wrong. So this bill, other than the proxy piece, which I think is okay, does very little with investing. I think some of my conservative colleagues have that right. It actually is just a really large preemption bill to a large extent. And again, I don't have any illusions on how this is going to go, but I have an amendment to try to fix that.
The amendment appears short. The clerk will read.
Page 3, line 22, by striking the first comma and inserting or. Also in line 22, by striking all after the second comma. In line 23, by striking all before including. In line 29, by striking the first comma and inserting or. Also in line 29, by striking all after the second comma. In line 30, by striking all before including. On page 1 in the title, in line 3, by striking all after state. In line 4, by striking all before from.
Representative Shu, you may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we want to do something about state contracts, state vendors, that's fine. I'm not going to vote for this bill either way, but I think holding our cities hostage in this is going to lead to a ton of unintended consequences. Maybe not this year, maybe not next year, maybe in 2 years, but just looking at the language of the bill, I think it's going to come in the next 5 to 10 years where one of your cities are going to be looking at entering in a contract and reading the language of this bill and realizing that they can't. So I'm not trying to scuttle this bill. I'm trying to make it flexible enough to allow our cities and counties to make that decision. I know the chair is probably going to come up and talk about a city in Johnson County who prevents gun manufacturing from holding events. If you're against that, that's fine. There are narrow solutions to deal with that particular problem if you want to do that. But this bill is a very, very blunt instrument when a scalpel will do. With that, I'll stand for any questions.
Does any member wish to speak to the amendment? Chair recognizes Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Will the maker of the amendment stand for one question? I'm confused. You said this bill doesn't do anything and then amends it because it does too much. Is that an accurate statement?
I said that the bill doesn't do anything on the investment front, really.
Okay. All I needed. Thank you. Body, I would ask you to reject this amendment. What we found while working this bill is there is a city in the state of Kansas that is actively discriminating against Second Amendment rights. So they are actively saying in their city ordinance that if you are a gun manufacturer of any kind, you cannot sponsor events, city events within the city. So this amendment would factor in firearms as a ESG provision and would disallow that city from discriminating against the firearms industry. So with that alone, I would ask you to reject this amendment.
To speak to the amendment, the chair recognizes Representative Vic Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support local control. And when I say it, I mean it. Secondly, I wrote it down. I heard the argument made more than once a short while ago by one of my friends that we should keep politics out of the free market. What are we doing with this bill except inserting our own politics into the free market? I don't know how many of you have a financial advisor. I do. I turn to him for investment decisions, and as much as I appreciate the intelligence of everyone in this room, I wouldn't go to you for investment strategy. Thank you.
Is there further discussion on the amendment? Chair recognizes Representative Schlingensiepen.
I'll keep this brief. John Brown didn't agree that we should keep politics out of economic decisions, and neither did the people who fought to make this a free state. If they had kept politics out of economic decisions, we would be a slave state today. Remember that.
Seeing no further discussion on the amendment, Representative Shu, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Like I assumed, the chair of the committee brought up the example of the city that he said discriminated against gun rights. But read the language of the bill. It goes both ways. If you want to have, if that is true and applies to this bill, then a city also then can't give preference to a gun event either. And so I would assume many of your cities would want to do that. And then again, I'm not trying to scuttle this bill. I'm trying to make it workable. I promise you, this is going to come back and bite us, this base bill. And then so with that said, I move my amendment.
You've heard the motion by Representative Shu to amend. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The noes appear to have it. Division has been called. The clerk will open the roll. I would like to remind everyone up in the gallery, we do not allow pictures of the voting board. I do see some cameras up there. Please refrain from taking any pictures. Seeing 15 hands, a roll call is in order. Has every member had an opportunity to record their vote? The clerk will close the roll. Does any member wish to change their vote? Seeing no changes, with 37 voting in favor and 82 against, the motion fails. We are back on the bill. Representative Shu, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to kind of end things up, I obviously don't support this bill, and not even because I believe that companies do have a social responsibility to be good stewards of our land, but also because this is a really gross infringement of local control. And again, we're going to regret this vote. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
For further discussion on the bill, the chair recognizes Representative Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a member of the Finance Committee and Institutional and Pensions Committee, and so I've thought about this quite a lot. And this is going to be short. Hearing the debate today, I believe that some of our colleagues misunderstand the import of this bill. Essentially, what this bill says is that CAPERS trustees should fulfill their fiduciary duty, which is, quite simply, to maximize return on investment. The concern was that with this ESG movement, the investments we were in, or which CAPERS would put us in, would be promoting a social policy objective, which is inconsistent with maximizing the return on the investment. So the suggestion is that this would preclude any investment in anything that had a high ESG rating. Not true, not true. To the extent that the fiduciaries can determine that that is the best investment for maximizing the return on the pension funds that they're investing, they can and should invest in that. So for the sake of CAPERS and preserving those monies, I urge you to vote. The other thing is, what I've heard is that back in I believe it's the 90s, that there was something in our law that said that CAPERS needed to consider investments in Kansas when they invested. And that turned out to be bad policy because we had very bad returns when they injected policy into their fiduciary duty obligations. So I urge you to vote yes on this bill. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion on the bill, Representative Hoheisel, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate all the good discussion today, and I appreciate the representative from the 114th District for his words earlier and all his work through the last year and a half. I also kind of want to point out that the whole point of this bill is fiduciary responsibility only. That's all we're going for here. We're not going to discriminate against, and we're not going to give preferential treatment to. We're only going to take into account fiduciary responsibility. And with that, Mr. Chair, I move that when the committee rises and reports, it reports HB 2436 favorably for passage.
You've heard the motion by Representative Hoheisel to report House Bill 2436 favorably. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion carries. This concludes our general orders. The chair recognizes the majority leader.
Mr. Chair, I move we rise and report.
Body, you've heard the motion to rise and report. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries.
The clerk will read the committee report.
Mr. Speaker, your committee of the whole recommends House Substitute for Senate Bill 113 be passed. House Bill 2436 be passed as amended.
The speaker recognizes Representative Adam Smith for a motion to adopt the committee of the whole report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the adoption of the committee of the whole report.
You've all heard the motion to adopt the committee report. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The committee report is adopted. Reports of standing committees, the clerk will read.
Committee on Elections recommends House Bill 2312 be amended. The bill be passed as amended. Committee on Federal and State Affairs recommends House Bill 2446 be amended. The bill be passed as amended. Committee on Federal and State Affairs recommends Senate Bill 3 be passed. Committee on Commerce, Labor, and Economic Development recommends Senate Bill 114 be passed. Committee on Water recommends Senate Bill 205 be amended. The bill be passed as amended. Committee on Elections recommends Senate Bill 208 be amended by substituting a new bill to be designated as House Substitute for Senate Bill number 208 as follows. An act concerning campaign finance relating to the Governmental Ethics Commission, modifying the investigatory and enforcement powers thereof and the schedule of registration fees for political committees, expanding the list of allowable expenditures from contributions, and the substitute bill be passed.
Is there any objection to returning to that order of business, introduction of bills and concurrent resolutions? Seeing none, the clerk will read.
House Bill number 2468 by the Committee on Appropriations, an act concerning state of disaster emergencies, requiring the Adjutant General to appoint an incident commander for weather-related disasters, establishing coordinating duties of the Division of Emergency Management, establishing the Disaster Contingency Fund for use by the State Finance Council to match federal grants and funds to respond to such weather-related disaster. House Bill number 2469 by the Committee on Federal and State Affairs, an act concerning a vacancy in the office of governor and changing the order of succession of such office.
Introduction of original motions and House resolutions. The clerk will read.
House Resolution number 6018 by Representatives Howe, Barth, and others, a resolution reaffirming the state of Kansas' commitment to internal combustion engine vehicles.
Are there announcements? Representative Patton will replace Representative Butler on the House Committee on Corrections and Juvenile Justice on March 23rd. This appointment will expire at the end of the day on March 23rd. Representative Butler will replace Representative Patton on the House Committee on Commerce, Labor, and Economic Development on March 23rd. This appointment will expire at the end of the day on March 23rd. Representative Hoagland replaces Representative Alcala on the House Taxation Committee on March 22nd, 2023 for one day only. Representative Hoy replaces Representative Vaughn on the House Judiciary Committee on March 22nd, 2023 for one day only. For further announcements, the Speaker will recognize Representative Tarwater.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Attention Commerce fans. We are canceling Commerce. No more meetings the rest of the session.
Speaker recognizes Representative Owens.
Well, it's kind of hard to follow that. We're not canceling corrections. As a matter of fact, we will still meet. Remember, this is a joint meeting with the Foster Care and Child Welfare Committee and Corrections and Juvenile Justice at 582 North, directly following. Thank you.
Speaker recognizes Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Insurance Committee will be meeting at the rail as soon as we adjourn. We've got 2 bills, 7 amendments, and a concurrent resolution that we'll have to discuss. Probably shouldn't take more than 2 or 3 minutes, I think. So immediately upon adjournment at the rail. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Speaker recognizes Representative Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Republican freshmen will have our final breakfast meeting at 7 a.m. tomorrow.
The Speaker recognizes Representative Stogsdill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Democrats will have agenda tomorrow morning at 8:30, 152 South. Mr. Speaker.
The Speaker recognizes Representative Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the Kansas Board of Regent Chair John Rolfe, I'd like to extend an invitation for everybody to attend their reception this evening from 5 to 7:30 p.m. in the Founders Room at the Beacon.
The Speaker recognizes Representative Riley.
Thank you, Speaker Pro Tem. So tomorrow morning we have a treat. David Beauchamp, he's the director of the Church of Ambassadors of Kansas. 7 a.m. in room 142 South. Hope to see you there. We'll have some coffee, maybe some donuts. Thank you.
Are there any further announcements? Seeing none, the Speaker recognizes the Majority Leader for a motion to adjourn.
Republicans, we're going to calendar tomorrow morning at 8:30. Mr. Speaker, I move the House adjourn until Thursday, March 23rd at 11 a.m.
You've all heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it. We are adjourned.